Welcome back to another slow and slightly confusing chapter of history. Tonight, we're diving into the world of French palace kitchens during the Revolution, where your job description suddenly shifts from create edible art for royalty to try not to get guillotined for knowing how to make fancy food. Picture this. You're standing in the most prestigious kitchen in Europe, your hands covered in chocolate from preparing Marie Antoinette's morning drink, when the sound of angry voices echoes through marble corridors, and you realize your culinary expertise has just become a liability. You're not just a chef anymore, you're an accomplice to oppression, and frankly, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing our global community of insomniacs and history buffs. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up on a crisp October morning in 1789, just as you have for the past 15 years. Your name doesn't matter. History forgot most of the kitchen staff anyway, but your role as sous chef to the royal household means everything. You've spent decades perfecting the art of creating Marie Antoinette's beloved chocolate with orange blossoms, that rich citrusy concoction that requires precisely the right temperature and timing. Your hands move with practiced efficiency as you prepare her morning drink, the same routine that once brought you pride, now feeling oddly hollow. The kitchen around you represents the pinnacle of culinary achievement. Copper pots gleam like mirrors, reflecting the dancing flames of the great hearth. Your knife collection, each blade honed to razor sharpness, sits arranged with military precision. You've mastered techniques that would make modern chefs weep with envy, creating dishes so elaborate they're practically edible architecture. Just yesterday, you crafted a pumpkin soup served in a hollowed gourd coated with meringue, a presentation so stunning it drew gasps from the courtiers. But today feels different. The usual chatter among the scullery maids has been replaced by nervous whispers. You notice how the footmen avoid eye contact, how conversations stop when you enter a room. The news filtering down from Paris grows more disturbing each day. Bread riots, angry crowds, guillotines being erected in public squares. Yet here you are, still preparing foie gras and truffle dishes for people who seem increasingly disconnected from reality. You remember when you first arrived at Versailles, a young apprentice dazzled by the endless parade of delicacies. Champagne flowed like water. Dom Perignon's techniques had made the bubbly beverage a staple among the aristocracy. You learned to prepare stomachs of riverside birds with sand leek sauce, a dish so bizarre it existed purely for shock value rather than taste. Their elite class had grown bored, you realized, and their menus reflected this desperate search for novelty. Your mentor, the head chef, taught you that cooking for royalty meant understanding psychology as much as seasoning. We're not just feeding bodies, he'd say, we're feeding egos. Every meal became a performance, each dish a statement of power and privilege. You mastered the art of chicken, cooked in lamb bladders, the infamous chicken in bagpipes, not because it tasted good, but because it demonstrated the kitchen's technical prowess. The irony doesn't escape you now. While you perfected these ridiculous culinary stunts, ordinary French citizens couldn't afford basic bread. The contrast haunts your dreams, elaborate brioche enriched with butter and cream for the nobles, while commoners nod on coarse, often moldy loaves. You've become complicit in a system that treats food as theater while people starve just miles away. As you finish preparing the morning chocolate, your hands shake slightly. Not from the cold, the kitchen stays warm year round, but from a growing realization that your world is crumbling. The recipes you've memorized, the techniques you've perfected, the entire structure of your professional life depends on a system that France is rapidly rejecting. You're a master craftsman in a dying art, and the angry voices growing louder outside the palace walls suggest that your expertise might soon be viewed as evidence of your guilt rather than your skill. The first sign of real trouble comes when you're kneading dough for the daily brioche, your arms working in the rhythmic motions that have become second nature over the years. Through the kitchen's tall windows, you catch glimpses of an unusual commotion in the palace courtyards. At first, you dismiss it as another group of petitioners. Versailles always attracted crowds seeking royal favors. But the voices sound different today, angrier, more unified. You pause your kneading flour still coating your forearms and strain to listen. The sound builds like distant thunder, growing closer and more menacing with each passing minute. Your fellow kitchen staff exchange worried glances as the wooden spoons in their hands slow to a stop. Marie, the pastry chef, who's been crafting delicate millefeuille layers since dawn, abandons her work entirely and moves toward the window. Mon Dieu, she whispers, her face pale as the powdered sugar dusting her apron. You join her at the window and immediately understand her terror. This isn't a crowd, it's a flood of humanity washing over the palace grounds. Hundreds of women, their faces twisted with rage and desperation, surge through the gates that have never failed to keep the common people at bay. They carry makeshift weapons, kitchen knives, farming tools, anything sharp enough to make a point. Some brandish loaves of moldy bread, like accusations shouting about empty bellies, while the queen dines on delicacies. The irony hits you like a physical blow. These women are carrying the same types of knives you use daily, but theirs represent desperation while yours represent privilege. You've spent years perfecting your knife skills to create paper-thin truffle shavings and precise vegetable julienne, while they've sharpened their blades out of necessity to defend their families against starvation. Your sanctuary is about to be violated. The kitchen that has been your domain, your source of pride and identity, suddenly feels like a trap. Every gleaming copper pot, every perfectly organized spice rack, every imported delicacy becomes potential evidence of excess and cruelty. You realize, with growing horror, that your beautiful workspace with its soaring ceilings and state-of-the-art equipment will be seen as a monument to inequality. The first intruders burst through the kitchen doors like a dam breaking. Their eyes, wild with fury and hunger, scan the room with predatory intensity. One woman, her dress patched and repatched spots, your collection of silver serving spoons, and lets out a cry that's part triumph, part anguish. "Look at this," she shouts to her companions. "Silver spoons while our children gnaw on leather." You press yourself against the wall, trying to become invisible as they swarm through your domain. They're not just looking for food, though they certainly grab whatever edible items they can find. Instead, they seem most interested in your tools, your beautiful implements of culinary creation. A burly fishmonger's wife hefts one of your prize copper pots, testing its weight, with the appreciation of someone who knows quality when she sees it. This could feed a dozen families, she mutters, tucking it under her arm like a prize. The scene unfolds with surreal intensity. Women who have probably never seen a truffle in their lives discover your carefully stored collection, their faces cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally rage. Mushrooms worth more than my husband's yearly wages. One spits, hurling the expensive fungi to the floor where they're trampled underfoot. The waste that would have horrified you just hours ago now seems almost appropriate, a kind of rough justice. Your knife collection, your pride and joy, disappears piece by piece. Each blade represents years of savings, careful selection, and countless hours of maintenance. You watch helplessly as a young mother examines your best carving knife, running her thumb along its edge with the expertise of someone who knows weaponry from necessity. She nods approvingly and slips it into her belt, transforming your tool of artistic creation into an instrument of revolutionary potential. Historians still argue whether the October days of 1789 were spontaneous uprisings or carefully orchestrated political theater, but from your position, cowering in the corner, the distinction seems meaningless. What matters is that your world, literally your workspace, is being dismantled by people whose hunger you've helped create through your complicity in the system of excess. The strangest part is how methodical they are. This isn't random destruction, but purposeful redistribution. They're not breaking your equipment out of spite, they're taking it because it represents real value, real utility in the hands of people who understand genuine need. Your decorative serving platters become practical cookware for families who have been making do with cracked pottery and bent spoons. As quickly as it began, the storm passes. The women move on, carrying your tools and equipment like trophies of war. You're left standing in a kitchen that looks like a crime scene, flour scattered across the floor, overturned pots, and the lingering scent of spilled wine mixing with the acrid smell of fear sweat. Your beautiful, organized workspace has been transformed into something that more accurately reflects the chaos engulfing France. The kitchen never recovers from that day, but somehow, impossibly, you're expected to keep cooking. The remaining aristocrats who haven't fled to Austria or England still need their meals, though their appetites have grown considerably more nervous. You stand before what's left of your equipment, a few dented pots, some chipped serving dishes, and whatever knives the revolutionaries deemed too dull to bother stealing, trying to create the same elaborate feasts that once defined French court cuisine. Your new reality becomes a masterclass in culinary improvisation mixed with psychological warfare. The Comte de something or other, whose title grows less impressive by the day, still insists on his morning chocolate, but now he jumps at every sound from the corridor. You watch him through the service window as you prepare his drink, noting how his hands shake when he lifts the cup. He's developed the habit of positioning himself near the room's back exit, his eyes constantly darting toward the door, like a rabbit sensing wolves. The menu requests that filter down from the remaining courtiers read like desperate attempts to maintain normalcy in an increasingly abnormal world. They still ask for poached truffles, those expensive fungi that once symbolized refined taste, but now feel more like evidence in a trial for crimes against humanity. You comply partly out of professional habit, and partly because refusing would mean immediate unemployment, and unemployed palace cooks don't last long in revolutionary France. Marie Antoinette herself has become a ghost, haunting her own palace. The woman who once demanded her special water from Ville d'Avray now accepts whatever liquid you can provide without complaint. Her famous love for elaborate pastries has withered into mechanical eating, as if she's forgotten how to taste pleasure. You remember preparing her chocolate with orange blossoms just months ago, watching her face light up with genuine delight. Now she stares at her food like it might contain poison, which, given the current political climate, isn't entirely paranoid thinking. The most surreal aspect of your new job description involves timing. You've become expert at recognizing the sounds that herald trouble, the distant roar of approaching crowds, the clatter of running footsteps in marble corridors, the shouted commands of guards taking defensive positions. When these sounds arise, you learn to quickly hide any evidence of excess. Elaborate dishes get simplified, expensive ingredients disappear into hidden pantries, and serving pieces are swapped for plain pottery that won't scream aristocratic privilege quite so loudly. One evening, while preparing what you privately call the Last Supper for a group of nobles who've received disturbing news about their estates being burned, you overhear a conversation that chills your blood. The Marquis de Terror-in-Waiting mentions receiving a list of names kitchen staff who've been deemed complicit in the oppression of the people. Your name apparently appears somewhere in the middle, noted as expert in luxury cuisine preparation. You continue whisking the sauce for their coq au vin, but your mind races through possible escape routes. The recipe calls for expensive wine reduction, but you find yourself wondering if this might be the last time you ever prepare it. The irony doesn't escape you. You're literally cooking your way toward potential execution, each perfect dish serving as evidence of your guilt rather than your skill. The guests themselves have developed peculiar eating habits born of constant fear. They consume their meals with desperate intensity, as if savoring flavors they might never taste again. Conversations that once flowed around topics of court gossip and fashion now focus obsessively on escape routes, foreign contacts, and the best methods for smuggling jewelry across borders. You serve their baba cake, that Polish delicacy soaked in fortified wine that once brought such joy to the court, and watch them eat it like condemned prisoners enjoying their final meal. Historians still argue whether Marie Antoinette ever actually said, "Let them eat cake," but from your position behind the service window, you witness something far more disturbing: aristocrats who continue eating cake while very aware that others cannot, their guilt and terror mixing with every bite like a bitter seasoning that no amount of sugar can mask. The supply chain for your ingredients has become a nightmare of black market dealings and dangerous liaisons. The fishermen who once proudly delivered fresh oysters to Versailles now risk their lives making such deliveries. Your connection with the truffle hunters has been severed. They've either joined the revolution or fled to safer territories. Even basic items like quality flour require negotiations with smugglers who charge revolutionary prices for counter-revolutionary goods. You develop a new skill set that no culinary school ever taught cooking under siege conditions. You learn to prepare elaborate presentations using common ingredients disguised as luxury items. Chicken liver becomes foie gras through careful preparation and creative sauce work. Local mushrooms are elevated through technique until they almost resemble truffles. You're essentially running a culinary confidence game, maintaining the illusion of aristocratic dining while working with increasingly peasant-level ingredients. The stress begins affecting your work in ways that would have horrified your younger self. Your knife work, once precise as a surgeon's, becomes erratic. Sauces that you could prepare blindfolded now require intense concentration to avoid breaking. The muscle memory built over decades of practice wars against the constant adrenaline coursing through your system, creating a kind of culinary performance anxiety that makes every dish a small miracle of completed execution. The revolution doesn't just change your clientele, it completely redefines what cooking means. One morning, you wake up to discover that your remaining aristocratic employers have vanished overnight, leaving behind only hastily scrawled notes and unpaid wages. The palace feels like a museum exhibit of abandoned luxury, but the new authorities have plans for places like Versailles. More specifically, they have plans for people like you. A delegation of stern-faced revolutionaries arrives at your kitchen door with a proposition that sounds more like a threat. The Citizens Committee for Public Nutrition, yes, that's actually what they call themselves, needs experienced cooks to help feed the masses, not the pampered masses lounging in silk drawing rooms, but the actual masses, thousands of hungry Parisians who've been surviving on scraps while you perfected the truffle presentations. Your expertise in feeding a dozen nobles must now stretch to feed hundreds of citizens, and failure isn't really an option in the new France. Your first assignment involves establishing a public kitchen in what used to be the Marquis de Pompous Name's private dining hall. The crystal chandeliers still hang from the ceiling, casting fragmented rainbows across long wooden tables that have replaced the elegant furniture. You stand before massive vats salvaged from monastery kitchens, trying to calculate how to multiply your delicate court recipes by factors of 50 or more. It's like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. The ingredients available for this mass feeding operation bear no resemblance to your former pantry. Instead of imported spices and rare delicacies, you work with whatever the revolutionary supply chains can provide: root vegetables that have seen better days, cuts of meat that require creative interpretation, and grains that would have been rejected by your pickiest scullery maid. Yet somehow, you're expected to create meals that will satisfy people who haven't eaten properly in months. You discover that feeding revolutionaries presents unique challenges beyond simple scale and ingredient quality. These aren't docile dinner guests politely nibbling at experimental cuisine. They're passionate, opinionated people who view food as a basic right rather than artistic expression. When your first attempt at people's soup turns out too bland, a burly blacksmith doesn't hesitate to march into your kitchen and explain with colorful vocabulary exactly what he thinks of your cooking skills. The irony cuts deep as you realize you're essentially learning to cook all over again. Your decades of training in elaborate presentation and complex flavor combinations prove nearly useless when dealing with hungry crowds who care more about substance than style. The techniques that made you valuable to the aristocracy, creating edible sculptures, balancing delicate flavors, timing multiple courses, become obstacles rather than assets in your new role. Your fellow kitchen workers represent a fascinating cross-section of revolutionary society. Former palace servants work alongside passionate citizen volunteers who've never cooked professionally but possess fierce dedication to the cause. A seamstress who lost her job when her aristocratic clients fled now chops vegetables with the same precision she once applied to intricate embroidery. A former soldier explains how army cooking techniques can be adapted for civilian mass feeding his battlefield experience, proving more relevant than your court training. The transformation extends beyond just cooking methods to fundamental philosophy about food's purpose. In the aristocratic system, meals served as entertainment social markers and expressions of power. Now you're part of a movement that views feeding people as a revolutionary act, proof that the new France can take care of its citizens better than the old monarchy ever did. Every bowl of soup becomes a political statement, every loaf of bread a small victory against the previous system's failures. Historians still argue whether the revolutionary government's public feeding programs were genuine attempts at social welfare or calculated propaganda moves. But from your position, ladling stew into countless bowls, the distinction feels academic. What matters is the faces workers who haven't had a full meal in weeks, children whose eyes light up at the sight of meat in their soup, elderly citizens who cry actual tears over bread that isn't moldy. The logistics of your new job would make your former position seem simple by comparison. Instead of planning meals for a predictable group of aristocrats with known preferences, you now feed whoever shows up whenever they arrive with whatever ingredients happen to be available. Your careful menu planning gives way to improvisational cooking on an epic scale. Some days you have potatoes but no meat. Other days meat arrives, but there's no bread to accompany it. Supply runs become adventures in revolutionary economics. The same markets that once reserved their finest goods for palace buyers now operate under equality principles that sound noble but create practical chaos. You queue alongside ordinary citizens, your former status as palace chef, now more liability than asset. Vendors who once competed for your business now eye you suspiciously, wondering if your refined palate makes you unsuitable for serving the people. Your knife skills at least transfer effectively to the new role. The precision you developed crafting delicate garnishes proves invaluable when processing massive quantities of vegetables. Your understanding of timing and temperature control helps prevent disasters when cooking for hundreds rather than dozens. Gradually, you begin finding ways to honor your training while serving your new masters, the people of France. The most challenging aspect isn't the physical work or even the political pressure, but the psychological adjustment of completely redefining your professional identity. You spent years becoming an artist of aristocratic excess, and now you must become a craftsman of democratic sustenance. It's like being a portrait painter suddenly asked to paint houses, technically similar skills, completely different purpose and aesthetic. Surviving as a former palace chef in revolutionary France requires developing skills they definitely didn't teach at culinary school. You learn to hide your knife techniques when cutting vegetables, deliberately making your cuts less precise so you don't stand out as someone with aristocratic training. The muscle memory of 15 years creating perfect brunoise cuts fights against your survival instincts, telling you to chop more like a common cook. It's exhausting performing culinary mediocrity when excellence has been beaten into your very bones. Your vocabulary undergoes a complete overhaul as well. Words like delicate, refined, and exquisite disappear from your professional lexicon, replaced by revolutionary approved terms like hearty, substantial, and nourishing. You catch yourself mid sentence when describing a dish as elegant, quickly pivoting to call it satisfying for working people. The language of food becomes as politically charged as everything else in the New France, and a misplaced adjective could mark you as a counter revolutionary sympathizer. The transformation of your palate proves the most personally devastating change. Years of tasting expensive wines and exotic spices have trained your tongue to detect subtle nuances that now feel like curses. When you sample the wine available for cooking rough, acidic stuff that would have been rejected for servants' quarters in the old regime, your refined palate rebels against flavors that your new colleagues find perfectly acceptable. You learn to suppress your grimaces, nodding appreciatively at beverages that taste like liquid punishment to your educated taste buds. Root vegetables become your new specialty out of pure necessity. Turnips, parsnips, and carrots replace the exotic ingredients that once defined your repertoire. You discover techniques for transforming these humble ingredients into something approaching palatability, though palatability itself has been redefined downward to match available resources. Your creativity gets channeled into making the 20th consecutive potato-based meal seem like a completely different dish, armed with nothing but varying cooking methods and whatever herbs you can forage. The black market becomes your secret lifeline to maintaining any semblance of quality in your cooking. Through whispered conversations and careful negotiations, you occasionally acquire better ingredients, a bit of decent cheese, some properly aged vinegar, perhaps real butter, instead of the rancid substitute typically available. These transactions feel like drug deals conducted in shadowy corners with constant fears of discovery by revolutionary authorities who might interpret such activities as evidence of counter-revolutionary luxury. Your former colleagues scatter like leaves in autumn wind, each finding their own survival strategies. Some flee to other countries, seeking employment in foreign courts that still appreciate elaborate cuisine. Others completely abandon cooking, taking up trades that carry less political baggage, blacksmithing, carpentry, anything that doesn't remind people of aristocratic excess. A few like you attempt to adapt their skills to serve the revolution, though success rates vary dramatically. The psychological toll of constantly hiding your true capabilities begins affecting your work in unexpected ways. You develop a peculiar form of imposter syndrome where you feel like a fraud for knowing too much about cooking rather than too little. When younger cooks ask for advice, you must carefully meter your responses, sharing enough knowledge to be helpful without revealing the depth of your training. It's like being a scholar forced to pretend illiteracy while teaching children to read. Memory becomes both blessing and curse as you involuntarily compare every meal you prepare to its aristocratic equivalent. Serving bread soups to hungry citizens, you can't help remembering the elaborate consommes you once created for evening entertainment. The contrast isn't just about ingredient quality, it's about the fundamental purpose of cooking, shifting from art to survival, from pleasure to political necessity. Your hands, once steady as a surgeon's, when filleting fish or carving meat, now shake slightly when handling knives. Not from fear of the blade, but from fear of unconsciously demonstrating skills that mark you as palace trained. You deliberately nick yourself occasionally small cuts that would never happen to someone with your experience, maintaining the fiction that you're just another competent but unremarkable cook rather than a master craftsman in hiding. Historians still argue whether the period of revolutionary terror was necessary for France's democratic transformation or simply an extreme reaction to centuries of oppression. But from your position, stirring massive pots of communal stew, the philosophical debates matter less than day-to-day survival. Every morning brings new rules, new suspicions, and new ways your past might be used against you. The most heartbreaking aspect of your adaptation involves deliberately dumbing down recipes that could feed people better. You know techniques for making tough meat tender, for extracting maximum nutrition from minimal ingredients, for creating satisfying meals from scraps. But applying this knowledge too effectively might draw attention to your background, so you cook at perhaps 70% of your capability, good enough to keep people fed, not so good as to seem suspicious. Sleep becomes elusive as your mind processes the daily contradictions of your existence. You're using skills learned in service of inequality to now serve equality, but you must hide the very expertise that makes you valuable. It's like being a reformed spy who must constantly monitor their own behavior to avoid revealing their training. Your dreams fill with images of perfect knife cuts and properly reduced sauces, culinary phantoms from a life that officially never existed. The New Republic doesn't just change how you cook, it fundamentally transforms the entire concept of what meals represent in French society. Gone are the elaborate rituals of aristocratic dining, those choreographed performances where footmen served each course with theatrical precision while courtiers competed to display their sophistication. In their place emerges something unprecedented: communal eating as a democratic act where former servants sit beside former nobles at the same rough wooden tables, sharing the same simple fare. You witness this transformation firsthand as you help establish what the authorities call fraternal dining halls throughout Paris. These spaces occupy former private dining rooms of fled aristocrats, their crystal chandeliers casting light on scenes that would have horrified their original owners. Workers with calloused hands eat alongside former clerks, their conversations flowing between complaints about working conditions and passionate debates about the Republic's future. The very act of eating together becomes a statement about equality, though you notice how former servants still tend to sit slightly apart from former masters, old habits dying hard even in revolutionary France. Your role evolves from chef to something more like a community organizer who happens to cook. The Citizens Committee assigns you to train volunteers in basic food preparation, transforming enthusiastic but inexperienced revolutionaries into functional kitchen staff. Teaching a former wig maker how to properly brown meat or explaining soup stock fundamentals to an ex-bookkeeper provides its own rewards, even if you must constantly suppress your instincts to correct their clumsy knife work or inefficient stirring techniques. The ingredients flowing through your kitchen tell the story of France's economic transformation. Where once you worked with goods imported from across Europe, exotic spices from distant colonies, rare wines from specific vineyards, delicate fish rushed from coastal markets, now you cook with whatever French soil and French labor can produce. The forced localism creates unexpected discoveries as you learn to work with regional vegetables that aristocratic kitchens previously ignored, finding flavor combinations that emerge from necessity rather than novelty seeking. Bread becomes the revolution's most powerful symbol, and your relationship with it grows complicated as you watch its production democratize. The elaborate brioche, enriched with butter and eggs, that once graced aristocratic tables, gives way to sturdy loaves made from whatever grains are available. You participate in public bread-making demonstrations, where citizens learn techniques for maximizing nutrition from limited ingredients, though you must resist the urge to suggest improvements that would reveal your sophisticated training. The seasonal rhythms of cooking take on new political significance as the Republic attempts to break free from traditional aristocratic calendar customs. Religious feast days that once dictated menu planning get replaced by revolutionary celebrations that require their own culinary traditions. You help develop recipes for Liberty soup and equality bread dishes whose names matter more than their ingredients, creating new food culture that belongs to the people rather than the church or monarchy. Your former colleagues who chose exile send occasional letters through underground networks describing their attempts to recreate French court cuisine in foreign palaces. Their stories of homesick aristocrats paying fortunes for proper coq au vin or authentic French pastries seem like dispatches from another planet. Meanwhile, you're learning to find satisfaction in feeding hundreds of citizens rather than dozens of nobles, discovering that quantity has its own form of artistry. The children who frequent your communal dining halls become unexpected teachers as you observe their unguarded reactions to food. Having never known aristocratic excess, they approach meals without the complicated emotions that burden adults who remember the old system. Their enthusiasm for simple pleasures, fresh bread, clear broth, ripe fruit when available, reminds you of cooking's fundamental purpose beyond status display or artistic expression. Historians still argue whether the French Revolution's food policies successfully addressed inequality or simply redistributed hunger more democratically. But from your position, serving meals to former enemies who now eat at the same tables, you witness something remarkable: the gradual erosion of food-based class distinctions that once seemed immutable. The marquis who lost his estate chews the same tough bread as the blacksmith who may have helped storm his chateau, their shared meal creating a kind of rough equality that transcends their bitter history. Winter arrives with particular harshness, testing your resourcefulness as ingredients become scarce and expensive. You develop techniques for stretching limited supplies across maximum mouths, creating filling meals from combinations that would have seemed impossible in your palace days. Cabbage becomes the foundation for dozens of different preparations, each one designed to combat the monotony of limited choices while maintaining enough nutrition to keep working citizens functional. The revolution's approach to alcohol reflects its broader democratic principles as wine loses its aristocratic associations and becomes democratized, though democratized often means watered down when supplies run short. You oversee the transformation of former wine cellars into communal storage spaces where citizens contribute whatever bottles they can spare to shared meals, creating unexpected blends that somehow taste appropriate for the revolutionary moment. Your dreams gradually shift from nightmares about lost techniques and forgotten luxuries to something approaching peace with your new reality. The skills you developed serving aristocratic excess find unexpected applications in serving democratic necessity. You're still cooking, still feeding people, still using food to create moments of satisfaction and community, just for different people with different ingredients toward different ends. The fundamental pleasure of nourishing others transcends political systems, even when everything else about your profession has been revolutionized beyond recognition. As France settles into its new rhythms, you find yourself part of something unprecedented in culinary history, the birth of democratic dining culture. The elaborate rituals and expensive ingredients that once defined fine cooking give way to simpler values, feeding people well with available resources, creating community through shared meals, using food as a tool for equality rather than distinction. Your knife skills remain sharp, your palate stays educated, but your purpose has been utterly transformed. The revolution taught you that cooking at its heart isn't about impressing people with complexity or expense. It's about nourishing them, bringing them together, creating moments of satisfaction and community around shared tables. Whether you're preparing chocolate for a queen or soup for citizens, the fundamental act remains the same, taking raw ingredients and transforming them into something that sustains life and creates connection. Some nights, as you clean your battered pots and store your salvaged knives, you reflect on the journey from palace kitchens to people's dining halls. The path was treacherous, the adaptation painful, but you survived by remembering that cooking ultimately serves life itself rather than any particular political system. The revolution changed everything about how you cook, who you cook for, and why you cook, but it couldn't change the basic human need for nourishment and the quiet satisfaction of providing it. The new France may have different values, different priorities, different definitions of what constitutes a proper meal, but people still gather around tables, still break bread together, still find comfort in warm food shared with others. Your role in that eternal human ritual continues just dressed in revolutionary clothing rather than aristocratic finery. In the end, perhaps that's enough to keep cooking, keep feeding, keep creating small moments of satisfaction in a world that desperately needs them. Close your eyes now and let the gentle sounds of a busy kitchen fade into peaceful silence. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new recipes, new ways of understanding what it means to feed people well. But tonight rest in the knowledge that some things endure beyond revolutions, the need for nourishment, the pleasure of shared meals, and the quiet dignity of work that sustains life itself.